Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Navy League's annual Sea Air Space Conference and Trade Show just outside Washington, D.C., the #1 gathering of U.S. Navy leaders from around the world, along with their international counterparts, to talk about strategy, technology, budgets, and more. Our coverage here is sponsored by GE Marine, Huntington Ingalls Industries, and Leonardo DRS, and we're here on the HII stand to talk to the President and CEO of Huntington Ingalls Industries, Mike Petters. Mike, it wouldn't be a Navy show without us having a chance to talk. Thanks for the time.
Great to see you again, Vago. It's always a pleasure to chat with you about what's going on in the world.
It is indeed. You guys have traditionally been making acquisitions in order to try to expand the base. Talk to us a little bit about the G2 acquisition and Fulcrum. Both cyber, well, one is a cyber company that supports the SOF community, and the other one is, a health, defense health information company. Talk to us about this strategic transformation you're overseeing, because I see a little bit of a theme from what you were doing in oil field support services, over the years to try to grow that sort of engineering footprint of the company.
Yeah, so one of the things we learned over the decades of working with the Navy was being the kind of partner that has some understanding of where the customer is going to go and then trying to help the customer get there and turn that into like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we can do that, find their hardest problems, go figure out how to solve those problems. As we've been acquiring companies, it's been a very deliberate path, but as we've been acquiring companies over the last 8 years, we've started to expand our customer set. And we've brought that same idea to, okay, where are the customers going to go and what are the hardest problems that they have, and how do those problems line up with capabilities that we have already, or are there capabilities that we need to go get to support those issues? And and G2 and Fulcrum just fall right into that. All of that stuff can be brought back to our core business, which is in the shipbuilding business, but it's really in creating workforce and creating talented employees. So for us, it's a matter of taking the potential of our business and then trying to find ways to achieve that potential by expanding our customer set and by solving their hardest problems. For every one of our customers, we want to be on the short list of phone numbers or contacts wherein they have a really, really hard problem. We want them to call us because we want them to know that we're going to jump in, try to solve their problem as best they can.
And how far, it was interesting in the ad campaign that you guys had. There's an F-15, which is not the first thing you think of, for example, when you think of Huntington Ingalls Industries. And you guys historically have tried to stay in your lane, right? Whether on your special operations submarines or the work that you're doing with Boeing on extra large unmanned underwater vehicle, you guys are sort of staying in those lanes, even if you're expanding it into unmanned. Are you looking at sort of expanding the base to get beyond that? If I look at digital defense health, for example, talk to us a little bit about what we might see in the next 5 years from you, because you guys tend to move in move strategically, funny enough.
I actually think that there's more blending of the lanes now. The rapid transition of technologies means that if there's somebody out there doing something in, say, the cyber world or the data analytics world or artificial intelligence, then they're doing it somewhere. You're going to want to be able to do that in manufacturing too. And so for us, it's not really about getting bigger lanes, it's actually about making sure we have the capabilities in the lanes that we prefer, making sure we have the capabilities that we're going to need to be successful in those lanes. So I think it's more blending instead of expansion.
How do you, data, it's interesting, we talked to Christian Becker, SPAWAR Commander, Hondo Geritz, Bill Mers, all of them have been talking, as has the Navy leadership for a few years now, about the importance of data, certainly something important to the incoming Chief of Naval Operations, Bill Moran, has spoken eloquently about that, including on the data rights issue, which I want to talk to you a little bit about as well. But talk to us about how you expect to harness data in order to be able to help in ship construction, ship repair, and design, engineering, future prediction across the whole enterprise, how you guys want to harness and use data.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's hard to really even comprehend how much data there is. You think about data as something that comes off of a gauge or something you collect and all that stuff, but we're generating data every second of every day on everything that we're doing. So the first question is, how do you capture all of that? And then the second question is, after you figured out how to capture it, how do you take advantage of it? Some of the acquisitions over, like when we acquired Camber, they have a very strong data analytics group. And so we're able to bring some of that talent back to our shipbuilding business and say, okay, what do we need to capture? And then how do we take best advantage of that? Now, there are a lot of people out there that would say, and go to our customers and say, well, we can do this for you. Our approach has been, let's demonstrate it in the manufacturing sites that we have. Let's demonstrate that we've harnessed the data and that we can actually use it, because the question that's going to come back from our customers is going to be, well, if this is so great, why aren't you doing it? And so we want to show that we can do it, and then to the extent that we're able to do that, then we're going to create the opportunity that data analytics and that sort of thing is going to provide for us with our customers. We're going to be able to demonstrate it in our sites that's how we're using it.
There is a debate about who ultimately owns some of this data, right? I mean, from the Navy's perspective, well, I paid you to do the work on the program, so that data and all the intellectual property is ours. On the other hand, the industry looks at it and says, well, I mean, you get some of that and some of it you don't. What's the right balance and mix in terms of this relationship as both sides have certainly different ways of looking potentially at this issue? What's the right way from your standpoint as somebody who has both a lot of data and is a trusted supplier? What's the right balance here?
Yeah, frankly, it's not a new argument. It's a discussion that's been going on my entire career. Is that the government's intellectual property, or does that belong to the industry? I think what happens is the programs kind of find each program will find its balance, if you will. And I'm not sure that there's a kind of a broad brush way to describe that. I mean, it doesn't all belong to the industry, and it doesn't all belong to the government. And so I think in the discussions you have on a particular program or in a particular approach, that's part of the discussion, and we've been having those discussions for decades, frankly.
And I should have clarified on that, right? It's on things that the Navy paid for to develop, then that's where it's a little bit clearer where everything goes, whereas it's the other stuff I think that gets a little problematic. Let me go to programmatics in investment. Right now, I think it's safe to say a number one concern everybody has is, how does the submarine enterprise that has had and is undergoing a renaissance from design of Columbia, we're going to have 3 Virginia class soon. You and I have talked about that. We have a 2-ship Ford class agreement to build 2 Ford class carriers under a block buy. A lot of conversation about whether or not that could apply to other programs, which you've eloquently talked about, but I think we can get another bite of that apple. How do we, but with each quarter, there are increasing concerns about schedule slippage on Columbia. Eric Labs has articulately, one of the nation's leading naval analysts at the Congressional Budget Office has talked about, if we look at Ohio as a guide, the number for this program could be actually significantly higher than it is right now. And we've seen weld issues and a whole bunch of other challenges. How do we execute this plan, Mike, without having the entire enterprise sort of choke because of the sheer volume, complexity of work that has to go through the system in less than a decade?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really good question, and I think that if anybody actually had the answer to that question, we would all fall in line. The truth is that the industry has, it's not just Ohio, we have lots of experience with lead ships. The thing about a lead ship, whether it's Columbia or Ford or LCS or DDGs or DDG 1000 or LPDs, every one of us in the industry has had our interlude with a lead ship. And here's what happens in a lead ship. It's a new design. Because it's been a while since we've done the design, we're trying to move not a generation ahead, we're trying to move 2 or 3 generations ahead so that it will, over the life of that ship, will still be relevant at the end of its life. So you're talking about technological risk on the program going 2 or 3 generations ahead. You're now then going to say, we're going to do that with a supply chain that's out there that, quite frankly, the supply chain we have today is not the supply chain we had back in the 1980s and the 1990s. And so you're going to stress that supply chain. That's going to require capital investment. It's going to require investment in the workforce. We have seen, the thing about that lead ship is in the supply chain, the lead ship, it is a production unit. It's the first ship of its class. It's going to go to sea and make history for decades. It's also a prototype. It's a prototype in that you're going to be testing out the supply chain, you're going to be testing out the design, you're going to be proving the new technologies, you're going to be testing your build plan, you're going to be testing your capital investment, and we find ourselves often in this place where we resource it and we assume by resources that we're going to actually retire all of those risks perfectly. And if we retire 80% of those risks, we're bums. And I think we just have so much experience with that approach that maybe with Columbia we ought to just aggregate all of that and step back and say, okay, we recognize there's technical risk, there's workforce risk, there is going to be capital investment risk, there is build sequence risk. All of those risks are there. We can't wish them away, so now let's talk about how's the best way to go after that. Given the experience that we have, every class of ships has a lead ship. It is a prototype, and we got to make sure that we capture the lessons that we learned from the first ship so that when the second ship comes along, I think we did that okay on the Ford. You know, Ford was a lead ship, and it's a prototype. But we captured the lessons around manpower. So how do you take the manpower piece of the cost and make that more efficient? And we're executing the Kennedy at 15% less man hours. That's unheard of. I mean, the best we'd ever done was 8 or 9%, and we're in at 15% less. And so there are ways to capture all of that, but you got to recognize it's a production unit, but it's also a prototype, and that makes it distinct and unique from every other program that's out there. You know, you get a chance to build prototypes, and then you shift into low-rate production, then you shift into full-scale production. You don't do that with ships, and you don't do that with lead ships. And so I think we got to really be thoughtful about setting Columbia up so that we're not having the same discussion 10 or 15 years from now that we seem to always have on a lead ship.
Of course, Kennedy will just get its island on President Kennedy's birthday, which is going to be a big event, certainly at the yard that we hope we can attend. So talk to us about how we get this right, though, right? You and I have talked about strategic investment in the industrial base. You know, as you said, back in the 80s, we were building a lot of subs in a lot of different places, and we had a more robust industrial base to support. Now we have subs being built in, you know, sort of two places, but the industrial base itself has relatively atrophied. So does there need to be a strategic investment plan in terms of saying, you know, which I know the Navy and the nuclear side of the Navy does better, but still it's a tough challenge to tell some of these guys to, you know, what's the right approach for us to manage to get this right at the end of the day?
Well, I think the issue in the supply chain is that it's been cycled so much. You know, think about where we are right now with the shipbuilding budgets. We're as good a shipbuilding budgets as we have ever seen. The history of shipbuilding is it's been about a $15 billion a year business. For the last 2 years, and in the budget request this year, it's been almost $25 billion. The question for the entire industry is, given all of the other fiscal things that are going on out there, is it going to be 25 for as far as you can see, or is it going to come back down to the 15 level? And that, I think, is the number one issue that's out there for the entire chain. You know, when you talk to the shipbuilders, you talk to the suppliers, you talk about, let's go to a 355 ship Navy, or you come up, we're going to do some expansion, whatever it is, there is, okay, that's great. Are you going to stick with it? Because you're not going to do it in 2 years. It's going to take, you know, the Navy's got a 30-year plan. It's going to take a big part of that 30-year plan just to expand to the level that they're in. And look at where we are. We're going to do another force structure assessment this summer. You know, and so you can't fault the suppliers for stepping back and saying, are you really going to do this? And that holds them back from their capital investment, holds them back from their investment in the workforce. And so I think trying to build that credibility that, no, we are serious about this, we're really going to do this. It's not just a Navy thing, it's a Pentagon thing, it's a bipartisan legislative piece. The executive branch and the legislative branch are in concert on doing this. That would bring a whole lot of confidence to the base, which would then invite investment and that sort of thing.
Briefly, do you have high confidence we're going to stay at that 25 billion steady state number, or are you projecting actually a decline? Like, as you're doing your strategic planning to trim your sales, where are you trimming to on the compass?
Yeah, so we're in a little bit of a unique place. A major, because of the 2 carrier buy, because of the Block 5 that's coming up contract, we're in negotiations on that. Just won the destroyer competition last fall. A major piece, over half of the work that we have to do over the next 10 years is already under contract. And so, in a sense, the vibration that's out there is a little less impactful to us. The question is going to be, is there going to be the follow-on? Are the frigates going to actually go through on time, and are there going to be follow-on frigates, or is there going to, the LPD program, is that going to get in rhythm with the industry? Those are the questions that the budget speaks to. For me, I'm hopeful that it would stay at this level, because I think this is the level you have to get to the kind of the requirement that's been laid out there from the, what the national requirement is. My concern is that, sequestration is still the law of the land right now. And then what? And so I don't know what the catalyst is to get through the kind of the fiscal issues that are out there. And I think that's going to play in the middle of all of this. So I think that I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I can't say that I believe that it's going to happen with certainty yet.
And of course in Washington, right, debt's not an issue until it's suddenly a very big issue, and then it can take all the oxygen out of the room.
Well, here's what I would say about the debt is I don't know, I mean there's a lot of opinions about debt. What I do know is that debt is a political issue. Whatever it is fiscally and all that sort of thing, the economists, they can all go figure that out. It is a political issue, and so as the politics of it come through, I think it's going to be part of the challenge of the budget for next year and years after that.
Let me talk a little bit about unmanned vehicles. You guys are partnered with Boeing on the Orca program, which is the extra large unmanned underwater vehicle. There's a sense that you guys are big surface combatant and submarine manufacturers. Talk to us about what your strategic plan is on the unmanned surface space. And actually, if I look a couple of generations ahead, you guys have done some fascinating theoretical work on what undersea architectures and actually the kind of size of future unmanned undersea systems, let me just put it that way. Right. Talk to us a little bit about how unmanned is playing into your strategy on each part of this market, whether on the smaller side, the mid-size, the large, from sea surface to sea floor.
Well, we've seen for a while that, our approach is not to give the Navy a bunch of ships so they can go use them. Our actual approach is to be there to help the Navy create the Navy that they want, right? It's been pretty evident for quite a while that unmanned or minimally manned programs and platforms are going to become a bigger and bigger part of what the Navy's going to want to have as a capability. There's been a lot of projections in the UUV space, the undersea space, that it's going to kind of follow the aviation space, where we were doing this for a little while and then suddenly there was a knee in the curve and it went asymptotic, right? And there's been a lot of different opinions around when are you going to get to the point where there's a knee in this curve. I've been less likely to try to predict where that knee is and try to be more involved in let's get more involved in the day-to-day stuff so that we actually have the experience and the capability set so that when or if that curve starts to shift, we're going to be the ones that'll be in position to help make that happen. And so that's been our approach. You mentioned the oil and gas investment, but when we invested in that company, a portion of their company was operating undersea vehicles for the oil industry, and they're not doing that now because of all the shrinkage in the space. But we thought at that time, 4 or 5 years ago, we thought that the commercial industry was going to lead this. Because of what's happened in the commercial industry, we now believe that the government's going to lead this again. And we're just excited to be part of Boeing's team. We think that that's going to be, the more of that the customers get to use, the more of it they're going to want. And we're happy to be part of that and to make that case.
Are you satisfied that the Navy has as integrated an approach to looking at this vast architecture? Some folks we've been talking to here, Brian McGrath, the naval strategist, has talked about the need for actually better integration of all of these pieces to come together. I've talked to some folks about whether or not bringing Navy Materiel Command back again is the right approach to have that sort of 4-star oversight from beginning to very end. Do you feel that there's enough integration of that space happening to make sure that all elements of this highly complex future architecture are connected as well as they should be from sort of the inception?
I mean, that's another good question. I guess it kind of depends on what phase do you think we're in, as to whether you think it's integrated enough. I think we're still in the place where we're trying to figure out what's out there. What's the art of the possible? And when you're doing technological kinds of things, you don't really want to go to a single point solution too early. You want to have a lot of different things working. You want to try to see what might work. Yeah, it can be really frustrating for an industry partner to not have here's the roadmap for the next several years that we're going to go down, but it is new technology, and especially in the undersea space, just the physical challenges of communication and autonomy and power density, and those are challenges that probably are going to require some creative solutions to, and we may not know the best answer yet. So it could be more integrated. It could always be more integrated, but I'm pretty comfortable that where we are, the phase that we're in right now is let's keep trying stuff. Fail fast on things. Okay, that's an idea. We'll try it, and it didn't work. Let's move on, as opposed to, well, that's the way we're going. We're going to do everything we possibly can to make that work, and to the exclusion of all the other good ideas out there. I don't think we're quite at that point yet. So I think your view on that is kind of depends on where you think you are in the space.
Do you, as you look at it, so let me ask you just a couple of program questions. The president's budget included retiring Harry S. Truman. I know that was a couple of years out. It's very little near-term money to free up sort of that $5 billion a year by skipping the complex refueling overhaul, the RCOH, and then also the year of running costs on that carrier. And then an amphibious ship cut. Vice President Pence reversed the Truman decision to the surprise of some in the Navy leadership, but the amphibious decision is what it is. The thing that the administration also added was, well, it's a changing threat perception, which is why we're decided to do something else with our amphibious ship money, which some folks see as potentially problematic to tell an adversary that, hey, your strategy is actually working and I may not use these ships the way we're going to use them. From the standpoint of the CEO of the company that produces those ships, what do you see as the future of the amphibious ship portfolio if the Navy is already sort of putting out there and saying, well, I mean, these kind of ships will be vulnerable in this anti-access environment, whereas if you talk to anybody in the Marine Corps side of things, if you ask Bob Neller, the Commandant would tell you, I don't care how defended it is, we're going to end up going in there and kicking your butt. How do you see this in terms of the evolution of the amphibious warship debate, given that those ships are seen as not just critical in the projection of power, but also ideal platforms from which to do a whole variety of other things in the future?
I'm not a military tactician or geopolitical strategist. I would observe that.
But you are a distinguished graduate from the United States Naval Academy.
I did graduate from the Naval Academy. That's true. I would just observe as I've watched this debate. We've shifted the debate from the war on terror to now we have this peer competition. And as people have started to talk about the peer competition, they've kind of talked about the high end of that competition. That when we start throwing missiles at each other and it's very kinetic, and what are you going to need when you get to that point? The truth is that when you get to that point, we failed. And there are a whole host of things that our combatant commanders, the area commanders, fleet commanders, there's a whole host of things that they can do in the run-up to that point that can head it off and keep it from happening. And that's what these platforms are all about. I mean, certainly you want them to be credible enough so that if you ever start lobbing things at each other, we'll win. And we don't want that to be a fair fight. But the reality is that when one of our ships shows up off your coast, it needs to be credible enough to make the impression that the State Department wants to make. And so I think that part of the discussion, the less than, the kind of the spectrum of peer competition as opposed to the, direct peer competition, the spectrum of peer competition is not being talked about yet. And that's why you get some of these discussions about, well, we're not going to need that. Well, the amphibs are very, very useful in the whole spectrum. Not to say they're not useful at the very end, and I think that's a debate that will be going on, but there's a lot of these platforms and a lot of these things that happen out there that fleet commanders and the combatant commanders actually need every day to be able to kind of head off that endpoint. And I think that as the peer competition debate and discussion matures, I think people will start to understand that better.
And of course, I mean, the Navy's been having a robust debate on all of these platforms, including a very robust, public and private debate about the future of the aircraft carriers. But I'm not going to go there. Lightning round on a couple of things. Do you have enough, one thing which I should have asked a little bit earlier was, is there enough elasticity in the nuclear industrial base now for you to do new construction in the kind of private shipyard support of the Navy at the time when the public yards are under a lot of pressure as well? I know the Navy's reached out to both you and to Electric Boat in order to get that work done. Is there enough elasticity for you to do that and actually expand your services business at the same time you're trying to do this other complex part of the equation?
I mean, the one thing we do better than anything else is create workforce. And so if we can have a persistent, sustainable demand signal, we can create a workforce that can then be responsive to where you want to go in that space. You know, in the area of readiness, I think there's a lot. The Navy's got a lot of focus on that right now to try to take advantage of the data that we have, the information that we have. How do we create more readiness for the same amount of dollars that we have? And I applaud that, and I think that you're going to see the capacities that we have start to be utilized in a little bit different ways to create higher levels of readiness. And whether it's submarine maintenance issues or the surface ship maintenance issues, I know this has been a top level concern for the Navy, and we've been partnered with them to try to help them figure that out.
Why were you guys no bid on the icebreaker? A lot of folks thought that's exactly in your lane, thick steel, high metallurgy, you know, really that special steel you need. You guys are metallurgical experts as well. Why not bid on that?
Well, it was I mean, it's a great program, and the Coast Guard has been a great partner for us. But as we stepped back and looked at, you know, our production capacity, our workforce capacity, the requirements of the program, the resources for the program, we decided that we were going to step back from that and focus our energies in other places. And, you know, sometimes strategy is about what you're not going to do as much as it is about what you're going to do. So.
Let me ask you about automation, something we've talked about in the past. We talked to Tom Vecchiola of VT Systems, the victor in the Polar Icebreaker. Halter Marine is the one who's going to be building it. They're going to rename themselves ST Engineering soon. But one of the things Tom talked about is the importation of some of Singapore's highly advanced robotic and automated manufacturing processes to help reduce the cost of the ship and to try to do some of these complex welds and complex. Talk to us a little bit about the role of that. There's cultural changes that go with that. There's human manpower skills issues that go with that. Talk to us about how you guys are looking at automation and increased automation on the yard and how you're going to use that and to use humans in the right place and machines in the right place, and how do you figure that complex dynamic out?
Yeah, so if you don't have a digital strategy, it's too late. You know, and the Enterprise CVN 80 is going to be a ship that we build without paper. We're putting tablets in the hands of our workforce. We're giving them visual build instructions for how to go build this. We think that's going to shorten the time to talent. It's going to create more efficiency. That's going to have workforce implications, you know, and all of those things that Tom was talking about. What we're finding is that, you know, let's just take additive manufacturing, for instance. In the case of additive manufacturing, the technology is moving ahead very rapidly. The question is, can you get convinced that the part that you've printed is going to withstand the shock and it's going to hold up the way that the part we fabricated in the old way did? That actually is starting to turn out to be, that's actually the longer pole in the tent right now. The acceleration in the manufacturing technology is going so fast, and you've got to kind of work your way through and get certain that what you're fabricating in an advanced way is going to actually be as good or better than what you were fabricating before. That's sort of the first part of it, is how do we go and do this again? The second part of it is, okay, now that we have this capability, can we redesign those parts so that they're more efficient and more effective and cheaper? And so I think there's kind of two stages there. We're deep into it. You can see around here in the show, you can talk to any of our folks. We're doing this with a new workforce that are bringing and teaching our older workforce new tricks, if you will, and that's been very exciting to watch. Our people want to do a good job, and if there's a better way to do what they're doing, they're all in. And that's, you know, I think it's a great thing for us.
You've been very generous. One last question, first quarter margins. A couple of my friends on the street were saying, hey, ask Mike what happened with those. Tell us a little bit about what the challenge we saw there was.
Well, nothing happened. I mean, we just had a quarter where we have a very disciplined process for risk retirement. Our backlog has gone to now more than $40 billion. We have a lot of new work in the system. The milestones for risk retirement at the beginning of a program are pretty spread out. We didn't have very many milestones in the first quarter to assess risk and make some adjustments. And so, it didn't change anything for us. It didn't change our outlook for the year. It doesn't change our outlook for the next year. It's just the way the cards fell. And I'm pretty proud of the very disciplined process that we have.
Mike Petters, President and CEO of Huntington Ingalls Industries. Sir, absolute pleasure. Thanks very much.